most of your Walt Disney World vacation.
The top 6 Disney parks that never made it off the drawing board. Hi, I'm Herb Leibacher, and welcome to episode number 89 of the World of Walt podcast. Make the most of your Walt Disney World vacation for the week of September 11th, 2016. This is the podcast for Walt Disney World fans, whether you're planning your next trip or just enjoy reliving a little bit of Disney magic. Today, the podcast is sponsored by Ear to Their Travel. If you're planning a trip to any Disney destination, give Phil at Ear to Their Travel a call. Phil is a former Disney cast member, so he really knows how Disney works. He can help you plan all the details of your next vacation at no extra cost to you, while making sure you get the best deal on your trip. You can reach Phil at eartotheirtravel.com. It's been said that good ideas never die at Disney. Instead, they just go into hibernation, and eventually they wake up, perhaps in a different form, at a different time, or in a different place. Today, we're going to see how true that really is. It's amazing how many different theme park projects the Walt Disney Company started, only to have them get derailed somewhere along the line. These stories are fascinating, so today we're going to take a look at the top 6 Disney parks that never made it off the drawing board. To help me explore this topic, I'd like to welcome a former Disney cast member who loves a juicy bit of Disney history just as much as I do, Aaron Cohen. Aaron, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me back on. That is all true, everything you just said about me.
I think this is going to be a fun topic, but we were speaking and preparing, maybe a long one, so a warning to folks to get ready for what could be the record-breaking longest World of Walt podcast ever.
Yeah, there's a lot to go through, and it's really interesting stuff. But I think, I think it would do a disservice to this topic for us to, truncate it too much. I think we really need to talk about these things. So yeah, put up your feet, get something to drink, settle in, because this was going to be a little bit longer than normal.
That's right. Okay, so before we get to the main topic for today, the warm-up question is: what is your favorite Frontierland attraction? Big
Thunder Mountain Railroad. I don't even have to think about it.
Wow, that was a quick answer. Why?
That was a quick one.
Yeah, why?
It's a great ride. It's a classic. It's so much fun. It's. I've been going on that one since I was a kid, and when I was a kid, I wasn't sure I liked roller coasters or not. I've since decided I do. And sorry, as I adjust my headset there. And it's kind of like a starter coaster. My wife actually doesn't like roller coasters, loves it. It was one of my brother's favorite rides growing up, so we used to go on it a lot. I think my dad, my brother, and I went on it like 5 times in a row once on a quiet day. Just kept going back on and back on. It's just, to me, it's a very Disney. It really kind of is what you think when you think of Disney attraction, which is a lot of fun, very well themed, not over the top, rough. If you're not in a coaster, you can still have a good time with it. And it's a great attraction. I love that attraction dearly. I always have to ride it. I was there a few years back, and actually it was close renovations, and I was pretty upset. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would say Big Thunder Mountain Railroad.
It's a good choice. I thought a lot about this one. So I thought about Country Bear Jamboree. I think the music, I think the animatronics, I think the story are great there. I thought about Splash Mountain, which I think tells a really fun story. There's a neat back history to that. But then I thought about, when I only have an hour in Frontierland, what do I choose to do? And what I choose to do is Big Thunder Mountain. So I think I'm voting with you on this one. If I had to pick one thing out in Frontierland and I could only do that one thing that one day, it would be Big Thunder Mountain. And I imagine a lot of folks probably feel the same way. It is just classic Disney.
Yeah. And I will toss out, I recommend to people, if you're going to ride it, if you have ridden it, it is a great ride to go on during the day. On a sunny day, you can see all the things. I also recommend riding it at night. It's a little different. Just because you can't see the track coming, it feels a little rougher. Mm-hmm. It seems a little rougher. It seems a little more intense, a little bit closer to the Space Mountain experience. But either way, it's a great ride. It's a lot of fun. And, one of my favorites in the entire park, much less just Frontierland.
Yeah. And I think your point about riding day versus night is a really good one. I think there are so many things where you get such a different experience. Even things that are indoors, you get a different experience because your eyes are more adjusted to the dark. So just because you've done something once or done it once that day, think about going back again at a different time of the day, and you can get a different experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So on to the main event for today, the top 6 Disney parks that never made it off the drawing board. So number 1, Aaron, we are over to you.
My first one is called Westcott, which, just as it sounds, is a West Coast version of Epcot. So this one got announced in 1991, in May of 91. It was part of a big expansion of the Anaheim property. And this was during the Eisner years, when it was all about expansion. Part of the Anaheim expansion was going to be new hotels, new nighttime entertainment district, and the Westcott Park, which was basically a copy of Epcot in a lot of ways. It had Future World, it had the World Showcase, but there were a few differences. They had Space Station Earth instead of Spaceship Earth. Which is going to be, it's still going to be the Sphere, but it was be a larger version of it. I've also heard in my research it was supposed to be gold instead of white, but I don't know if that's true or not. This is just something that I came across as I was searching for information. And Future World is going to have improved versions of the Epcot Center attractions that were in Florida. And this was during the time of Horizons, World of Motion, Universe of Energy. So you're going to see basically the same attractions, but souped up versions of them. World Showcase was going to have some different countries, and they would be grouped by region. So you're going to have, the Asian section, which had China and Japan, and they were going to have more attractions in World Showcase. There's going to be a boat ride that took you around all of World Showcase. There was going to be a roller coaster in the Asia section. So, kind of similar to what they had in Florida, but building upon that in a lot of ways. Now, the project started going south in like 1992, 1993. And what happened was Euro Disney, now Disneyland Paris, opened and immediately started losing money. So as the company was focusing on trying to stop the hemorrhage of the money overseas, it started cutting into Westcot's budget. And so Westcott kept getting cut down. And it became a smaller and slower project instead of this big, ambitious thing that they were planning. And there were other financial aspects, and then there was actually a public outcry in the area because people didn't want to be around. People didn't want to live around it. They felt that Space Station Earth was going to be an eyesore when they looked out their windows and saw this huge gold sphere. They wanted Disney to pay for the relocation because they thought the lights were going to keep them up at night. And, so they kind of kept hitting snags, and eventually the project was canceled in early 1995. They finally just said, nope, that's it, not going to happen. And since then, the spot that it was supposed to be Westcott is now Disney's California Adventure Park. So they did put a park there, just not their original plan of Westcott. Which is kind of, it's kind of a shame to me. I love Epcot. I love the old Epcot Center. So I think it would have been really cool to see an expanded version of that that built upon, what they had laid the basis for in Florida. I think it would have been cool to kind of see them then build on that in California, but sadly it was not to be.
It's hard to imagine building a structure bigger than Spaceship Earth as Space Station Earth. That must have been just a huge plan for I would imagine, the centerpiece of the park.
Yeah, I've seen some sketches of like maps, and it looked like it was, the big kind of central, piece there was Space Station Earth, this gigantic and, like I said, possibly gold sphere. And like I said, one of the things was people didn't want to look out their windows and see that. Which, personally, I would love to look out my window and see that.
Yeah, me too.
But Spaceship Earth in Florida is one of my favorite views ever. So, if I could just wake up every morning, look out, and see that, I'd be happy. So, but I suppose I can see, people having some issues with that. So yeah, this never happened. It never came to be. It got shelved. And it's one of those, and we are talking earlier about, no idea ever really dying, but I haven't really seen much of that appear in future, projects. There's really nothing of Westcott in Disney's California Adventure.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does look like this one just got shelved and more or less forgotten about.
Yeah. It is interesting that eventually they were able to use that same space and get another park in, but maybe some of those restrictions to deal with concerns by the neighbors are a reason why some of Disney's California Adventure wasn't quite the smash hit right out of the gate.
I don't know. I mean, when I was researching this, I came across a whole bunch of things about, the purchasing of the land and the various zoning things, which I decided not to include because there's really not much less exciting than zoning restrictions. I apologize to anyone who listens who actually does that for a living, but so it really was this great huge expansion idea, and they really wanted to, because at the time it was just Disneyland Park. There was only the one gate there, so they really wanted to add the second gate and really make this huge thing. And like I said, some of the things along the way, like Euro Disney and stuff, helped to end the project.
I think we're going to see a trend on how maybe one project gets impacted by another as we go through our list. It's a very interesting part of what has happened through the history of the Disney company.
Yeah.
Okay, good one, Westcott. So number 2 is over to me. So we're going to jump from the 1990s way back to the 1960s, and I'm going to talk about Disney's Mineral King. So in the early 1960s, Walt Disney Productions had proposed building a new ski resort, of all things, in Sequoia National Park, and it was going to be called Disney's Mineral King Ski Resort. And so by 1965, the U.S. Forest Service had awarded the rights to develop the Mineral King area of this forest to Walt Disney. And they gave the company 3 years to come up with a plan. And then the next step after the 3-year plan was done was to come up with a permanent 30-year permit for operating the ski resort. And so Walt Disney himself was quoted as saying when he first had seen Mineral King, he thought it was one of the most beautiful spots he had ever seen, and he wanted to keep it that way. And so Disney started to come up with plans for the Mineral King Ski Resort. And they defined a $35 million plan for a year-round resort. And it was going to be kind of north and east of Los Angeles. And so $35 million in 1965 is the equivalent of about $250 million today. So this was a very sizable investment. And Disney seemed to be all into planning for this. So by 1966, some of the internal Disney documents described the fact that the architects were coming up with the plans for this resort, and it was going to be something where there were going to be ski lifts that were going to run all year round. It was going to be a self-contained village with pretty much everything you needed for your vacation. There was going to be a chapel, ice skating rink, stores, restaurants, and lodging. And so Disney had done quite a bit of planning. So as time went by, Disney started to adjust their planning, which they often did. Some of the first renderings were for very modern-looking buildings, and eventually they settled on something that was going to look more like a traditional Swiss Alpine village. And so actually one of the things they had planned for Mineral King was a dinner show. I believe it was a dinner show. It was definitely a show that was going to be just like the Country Bear Jamboree. Now, that didn't get built for Mineral Spring, but it eventually did make its way into the other Disney parks. So we're near the end of the 60s now, and something interesting happened. So the Sierra Club got involved in the project. So the Sierra Club was actually founded in 1892 by a preservationist, John Muir, who very interestingly makes an appearance in the American Adventure. And they had originally backed the project, but by the time it got to the late 60s, the Sierra Club was going to fight the project on environmental grounds. And so Disney was able to see that this was not going to be a project that was going to be easy to come to pass. And so one of the first things Disney did was revise the plans. So by the time we get to 1972, instead of a 22 ski lift project worth $35 million, it was now a 10 ski lift project worth $15 million. And by the time we get to 1973, papers like the Los Angeles Times started to run articles with the title of Planned Mineral King Resort Appears Doomed. So it just seemed like this project was going to be tied up in the court systems for years. By the time we get to 1966 and 1967, there were new regulations about environmental assessments. The Forest Service still wanted this project to go through, but by the time we get to 77 and 78, Disney had walked away. And in the late 70s, Congress actually took the land for Mineral King out from the National Forest Service and put it back into the Sequoia National Park. And as part of that, they created legislation so that ski facilities would not be built at any time in the future at Mineral King. So on the surface, you could look at this story and say, well, here's an example where environmental concerns stopped this project. And I think that's probably part of what happened. But I think there are a few other things that happened as well. So one is that right in the middle of this timeline, in December of 1966, Walt Disney died. And so Walt was the driving force behind pretty much everything that happened in the company during that time. And so there was no one who could drive things through to completion and make the decisions when somebody needed to be a tiebreaker. The other interesting thing that happened, though, during this time is that in 1971, the Walt Disney World Resort opened. And so Disney originally planned for Walt Disney World to be a project worth $70 million. And in today's terms, that's like $500 million. Well, instead of a $70 million price tag, Walt Disney World ended up costing $400 million, or in today's money, $3 billion. So basically, they went over budget by $2.5 billion. So Disney World is wildly over budget. The founder of the company dies. They are getting tied up into these difficult court cases. It's easy to understand why the Mineral King Ski Resort never got off the ground.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we see in a lot of these cases is either people or organizations fighting the project.
Yeah.
With Westcott, with just the surrounding populace, getting upset and fighting it, and with this one with the Sierra Club, and we're going to see that again in some other ones as well, where and I don't know if it was, I don't know how much of it is people having genuine concerns about things, or people just wanting to fight the big Walt Disney Corporation, or a combination thereof. Mm-hmm. But it is interesting how much that comes up in these different projects, and how meaningful it is to the end of each project, and
yes.
how much that had to do with it.
Yeah, you're right. It's interesting how maybe when the Disney company purchased all the land for Walt Disney World Resort in Central Florida and then got some legislation passed, maybe they insulated themselves a bit. I really haven't heard stories about the sort of legal challenges or local opposition here in Central Florida, and maybe it's because it wasn't going to be a view from anybody's bedroom to a giant gold sphere. It was a bit buffered, but in a lot of these other cases, it wasn't buffered like that at all.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, who knows? You'd have to go back in time and ask people of the day what was happening.
Yeah. Okay, that was number 2, Disney's Mineral King. Number 3, Aaron, back to you.
So my next one was announced in 1993, but in a way it kind of harkens back to the days of Walt himself, because Walt was very patriotic, very into American history, and you see that in the parks with Liberty Square, with the Great Moments of Mr. Lincoln, with the Hall of Presidents. He was very, very, very big, and actually early Disneyland concepts had a much bigger American history aspect to them than what ultimately happened in the parks. So this one, in a way, kind of harkens back to that thought process. And this was announced by Michael Eisner in November 1993. there's a press conference in Haymarket, Virginia, for a project called Disney's America. Now, they had actually, by this point, by the time they announced, I don't know if it was before or after the announcement, but they had managed to option about 3,000 acres in Virginia from another company. I think it was Exxon, but don't quote me on that. That had bought this property and then wanted to unload it, essentially, and nobody wanted to buy it. And Disney was like, "Oh, we will," and so they optioned it from them. And basically, this was going to be a park entirely themed on American history. So it was going to be a theme park, but it was going to be like an edutainment park. Eisner touted the fact that he assembled a team of historians and academics to offer advice on this to make it happen. And like I said, it was about 3,000 acres, but they did say in the plans that only about 1,200 of the acres were going to actually be built on. They learned their lesson with Disneyland, and they wanted to have a buffer zone, so they wouldn't have it just kind of butting up against property that wasn't theirs, essentially. So what you had was a hotel, at least one hotel, that, from what I've read, was possibly going to be like a Civil War era lodge themed hotel. And then you went into the hub, Crossroads USA, and off of that were different sections, different lands, just like a Disney park, but they were themed from different areas of American history. So you had like a Native America section, you had a Civil War fort, you had an Industrial Revolution section, and each section was a period of time from American history. And they were actually, in the press conferences and the early press releases, were pushing this as a complement to the Washington, D.C. monuments and museums, because it was only about 20 miles away from D.C. So they're really pushing the fact that you could go see these monuments and stuff, and then you could come to Disney's America and learn about the American history. So in a way, it was very different from what Disney had put out before, in the sense that it wasn't a huge theme park with a big castle. It was really focused on this kind of educational type of experience. It was still a Disney park, though, so they just still had attractions and dark rides and roller coasters and a hotel and restaurants. And what happened, just like in the previous ones, is some residents started to fight it. In this case, it was there were battles with some of the more well-to-do residents of that area who have their big mansions out in Virginia, who became convinced that the towns were going to become overrun with tourists and traffic, and strip malls were going to pop up, and restaurants and stuff were going to pop up and kind of ruin their homes. So they started fighting it. And what's interesting about this one is public support was actually fairly positive. It was just a very vocal select group of kind of the richer residents of that area that were fighting it. But the general populace were actually kind of okay with this project. I mean, it would have brought jobs, it would have brought tourists, and and if it would have taught people about American history, then hey, bonus. So so there's a lot of that happening. And then as these richer residents were fighting it, they got some politicians on their side. They got historians on their side who claimed that the park was going to be factually inaccurate with its history, and it became another battle. It was Disney versus all these other forces trying to go against them. And it's interesting to note that there were these politicians and these historians who were saying that the history was going to be inaccurate, it was going to be all Disney-fied, and we don't want it because it's going to teach kids the wrong things about American history. And then supposedly at one point Eisner was like, well, what if we put the park somewhere else? And they were like, oh, that's fine. So it sounds like it wasn't necessarily the content of the park, it's just they didn't want it in their backyards.
Yeah,
is really what it boils down to. So Disney's America was canceled officially in September of 1994. And there were a few things that happened that really led up to the ending of this project. The Disney president at the time, Frank Wells, passed away in an accident. Katzenberg left. He was supposed to be the heir apparent and didn't get the job, so he ended up leaving. Michael Eisner himself had heart surgery and was recovering from that, and then there was the constant litigation and constant fighting from politicians and the well-off residents, and it was just, I think it was the heart, from what I've read, he was just tired after all that stuff had happened and just didn't want to deal with the fight anymore. I have read that he did hope to, Eisner did hope to build it elsewhere. Like, he still wanted the park to happen, but it just eventually got shelved.
Very interesting how all these forces come together. And I think it's interesting, too, that Disney wanted to complement what was happening in Washington, D.C. with the monuments and the museums, and to take on a topic like American history. I think a lot of folks would say, well, that's not going to be interesting to a large enough audience, but I think Disney has proven in subsequent years that they have been able to take on topics like retelling of American history and the American adventure, or dealing with history in the Hall of Presidents, and they can do it in a way that's both entertaining and educational. And it would have been fascinating to see what they might have been able to pull off in a park like this.
Yeah, absolutely, and there were obviously some attractions just for fun. There was a section, the section of the park called Enterprise, which was the Industrial Revolution themed area. Actually, would have had a roller coaster called the Industrial Revolution. A steel coaster. So. So obviously there are the rides that are just for fun, but it does sound like there are going to be a lot of shows, a lot of dark rides, possibly even reenactments of things. And I was trying to find out, and I couldn't find in my research if this was going to be like a regular Disney park where you have cast members just kind of there in a costume being themselves, or if it was more of a themed thing. Where the cast members were like, in period garb playing the parts. Mm-hmm. Kind of like what they're planning to do with some of the newer lands now, like Star Wars Land, where the cast members are going to be characters. I was trying to find that, and I couldn't find anything about that. And it's interesting because, like you said, it's very different from like a Fantasyland or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that it would happen, because kind of in the 90s, where it does sound like something that Walt himself might have been into, but there were 30 years difference between him and this project.
Yeah. Wow, the things that could have been. Very interesting. Okay, number 3, Disney's America. Number 4 is back over to me, and I'm going to talk about a park that didn't make it off the drawing board, Disney's Riverfront Square. So back in 1955, when Disneyland opened, Walt publicly stated that he had no intentions of opening up theme parks anywhere else. And I guess after he had gotten through the huge job that it was to open Disneyland, he probably truly felt that way. But by the time we got to 1963, the Disney company was meeting with other folks to talk about new parks. And one set of people that they met with were in St. Louis. And so the Disney company met with the mayor of St. Louis because St. Louis was getting ready to put in plan some big changes for the city's bicentennial. The city's bicentennial, interestingly, is in 1964, which means that St. Louis is actually older than the United States. But they were getting ready for this big celebration. And so they had a spot where they wanted this theme park. It was going to be just a couple blocks away from the Bush Memorial Stadium, which was under construction at that time. And Walt had his Imagineers drop some plans for this new type of theme park. And the story goes that Walt himself met with August Bush Jr. from the Bush beer family. And August said to Mr. Disney, there's no way your theme park is going to be a success in this town without selling beer. And so, of course, Mr. Bush is one who definitely wants to see more beer sales. And Mr. Disney famously didn't have alcohol in Disneyland. So by the time we get to 1965, the Disney company says this park is not going to move forward. There are questions about financing and ownership. Plus, they had this little project in Florida going on at the same time. So it's interesting, though, what the plans for this park included. So Riverfront Square would have been entirely indoors. It would have been contained in a 5-story building. It would have been open all year round. And it would have had this huge sort of open-air entryway, estimated cost $40 million. And so a lot of the attractions they had planned for Riverfront Square were based on things that would kind of tie into the St. Louis area, like there was a Lewis and Clark adventure. But there were also things that we've seen in other spots too. So there was going to be a New Orleans Square. There was going to be an attraction based on pirates. There was going to be some dark rides based on Peter Pan and Snow White and Pinocchio. But there were going to be some unique things too, like a pirate ship that you could explore, an opera house, an aviary, and a wishing well. So very interesting project, which in some ways reminds me just a tiny bit of what we got with Disney Quest, while Disney Quest is still around. But it's interesting that at least a piece of this is said to have been a personality conflict between Disney and Bush.
And that's interesting because, of course, the Bush family had their own park as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine they probably weren't so hot on more competition coming in.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know when Busch Gardens open, so I don't know where that falls in the timeline.
Yeah, that's interesting too. Okay, Disney's Riverfront Square. For all those of you listening in St. Louis, sorry that there's not a Disney park in your backyard. It could have been. All right, number 5, Aaron, back to you.
So I've got another of the proposed Eisner expansions. Michael Eisner was all about his big budget projects, and so this project is originally called Port Disney, and the plans for it kind of started in 1988. Disney acquired property in Long Beach, California, and the planning kind of continued more or less in secret after that until Eisner announced it in 1990. Now, this is before Disney's California Adventure. This is even before Westcott was announced. So at the time, this would have been the second California park. Excuse me. So, and Eisner was kind of a ruthless businessman. So he kind of pitted Long Beach and Anaheim against each other, and was like, "Well, we want to make this park. We want to make a new park, and who's gonna be nicer to us, basically, to get this park there." This was about a $3 billion project at the time, and it was the park itself was gonna be on both sides of the Queensway Bay. And both halves were being connected by monorail, watercraft, and the Queensway Bridge. So the project itself was a couple of different aspects. There was a cruise ship port. His plan was actually to have cruise ships come in and dock here. So people getting on enough cruises would basically be getting off at a Disney park, essentially. There are going to be resort hotels. And so on the city side, there was going to be shopping, entertainment. It was going to be kind of like a downtown Disney Springs style thing. And then there was, on the other side, there was Portside. And Portside had some hotels, but also had what was known as the Disney Sea Park, which was a theme park that also had science and research areas, vaguely similar to like the Seas with Nemo and Friends at Epcot currently, but on a much bigger scale. So you had aquatic and water park attractions, you had a giant aquarium, you had hands-on exhibits. There was going to be Interestingly, there's going to be an area with a volcano, and central to that area was going to be the story of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Captain Nemo and the Nautilus, which is a Disney property that you really don't like. I mean, isn't really in the domestic parks anymore since they took it out of Walt Disney World. So interesting that there's going to be a park that was going to have that as a focus. And they had different areas. They had the city of Atlantis. They had the Heroes Harbor, which is kind of a Greek-themed area, which is going to have a maze made of where the walls were made of water. They were going to have Rainbow Pier, which is going to be a boardwalk-type area, which I suppose were early shades of Paradise Pier, Disney's California Adventure. They had Adventure Reef, which is going to be a Typhoon Lagoon-style area, which is going to have snorkeling and surfing attractions. So this is going to be big. This is going to be like a huge thing. This is going to take up, a lot of Long Beach and have all these different things happening. And once again, city officials and legislation and zoning started causing hurdles. And, people didn't want this huge thing there, and it was it started causing a lot of issues, and the park started shrinking in size, and they started cutting things back and taking features out, which started upsetting the officials at Disney who had been planning this park. They had this vision for it, and the more they cut out of that vision, the less happy they were with it. So in 91, there's a name change. It was no longer Port Disney. It was just Disney Sea. And it was cut back to basically just the theme park. And then in November of 92, so a year later, Eisner announced that it wasn't coming to the park wasn't coming to Long Beach anymore. He blamed it on basically the legislative issues they were facing, and he announced it was going to be built in Tokyo instead. And of course, it was. And Disney Sea is part of Tokyo Disneyland. And while I have not seen it personally, it's supposed to be incredible. So this is an example of a huge project starting and getting cut back and getting, hitting hurdles and then just ending up somewhere else.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing about Tokyo Disney Sea, and so I've never been there myself either. The pictures I've seen, though, are amazing.
Oh, they're beautiful.
Yeah, so it's interesting that they're able to take this idea and, again, doesn't die, just kind of hibernates for a while until it pops up somewhere else. And interesting, too, that we're seeing this theme about concerns from people who live nearby or from government agencies, which eventually get things to a tipping point where just Disney says, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, good. Port Disney, number 5. Interesting story. All right, number 6, over to me, last one. So this is one I have not really heard a lot about, so I'll share the research that I did find. And this is the SS Disney. So a lot of what I've researched was portrayed or shared by a Disney Imagineer. His name was Mark Hickson. And so Mark Hickson had a long, I believe, tenure with Walt Disney Imagineering. He worked on a lot of things like Splash Mountain and part of Tokyo Disneyland. He contributed to Spaceship Earth and Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. So he had a long history of different things he had done. And so he talked about this story that took place in the mid-1990s. So Jim Coro at the time was the chairman of Disneyland International, and he happened to be sitting next to a U.S. Navy admiral. And the two of them were speaking at this dinner, and the admiral says to Jim, I have an extra aircraft carrier. You should really put a theme park on top of that. And so the admiral was just joking. But Jim, the chairman of Disneyland International, thought, wow, that's a really interesting idea. So the next day, he started to ask around if there were folks inside Disney who had any experience dealing with ships. And it turns out that there were some people who had worked in different shipbuilding roles. And so they started to talk about it internally, and eventually the idea got to Michael Eisner, and Michael Eisner asked Marty Sklar, who's a legend in Walt Disney Imagineering, to do a study on the feasibility for building this theme park on a ship. And so the idea was that they wanted to bring the Disney theme park experience to locations where they would never be able to build a theme park. So they started to look at different locations really all over the world. And so eventually they started to focus on the Western Pacific, so Seoul and Beijing and Shanghai, Hong Kong. They even started to look at ports in Sydney and Dubai and Cape Town, even Honolulu. And they started to do some analysis to say, well, which sort of ports would be big enough to handle a ship of this size? And would people be able to get to these ports? And so the idea was that this ship would go into a port and it would stay there for maybe 2 or 3 months. And then it would travel to the next destination. And the idea was that the ship would not come back for 4 or 5 years so that people would be motivated to go and see it while it was there. And in addition to the ship itself, they would set up a main gate on the dock where you would unload ticketing containers, and there would be different places where you could buy souvenirs and food. It would be like a portable entry and a gateway into the ship itself. So on the ship, there were going to be things like the Casey Jr. train. There would be a Ferris wheel. There would even be a Fantasyland built under a huge glass dome. And so the idea would be that Fantasyland would be on one side of the ship and Tomorrowland would be on the other. There were no plans to replicate Frontierland or Adventureland. Because of the issues with dealing with a ship moving on the ocean, there weren't actually going to be any water rides. So things like It's a Small World, which today is a water-based attraction, would instead be rebuilt using Omnimover or some other vehicle technology, and you wouldn't be in a boat in effect. So the idea was explored internally. But interestingly, something was happening kind of overlapping. So in the 1980s, the Greyhound Bus Company, that Greyhound, decided they wanted to get into a different business. They wanted to start going into the family cruising business. And so they started something called the Premier Cruise Lines in 1983. They had a single ship, which was the Starship Royale. And the idea was that they wanted to offer affordable family cruises. And so what happened was Disney partnered with Premier, and they came up with this idea called the Big Red Boat. And so families could go on this cruise by Premier Cruise Lines, and they could see Disney characters. And so that worked out for a while, but it came time to renew the license, and they couldn't come to terms. So Premier and Disney couldn't come to terms. So what happened was Disney started to talk to other cruise lines like Carnival and Royal Caribbean, but they just couldn't come up with an agreement. So eventually Disney decided to build their own cruise line. So Disney didn't end up building a theme park on a ship, but eventually that worked into some partnerships they had with another cruise line and the launching of their own cruise line. So an example of where we see an idea that sort of twists and turns and maybe comes to an end, but then pops up somewhere else as something new and different.
Yeah, it's, the concept of a floating theme park is kind of weird. And, the Disney cruises, from my understanding of it, are kind of like that now. There's like attractions and stuff on the boats and stuff to do, but the fact that like this theme park would just end up in different places, that's a weird idea, even by Disney standards. Yeah. It's kind of interesting that you mentioned, when you were talking about how it would go to different ports that didn't have the theme parks, like Shanghai and Hong Kong and stuff, and of course they do have Disney parks now.
Yeah, that's interesting about that list, isn't it? Even Dubai, it doesn't have a Disney park there. I think there are Universal parks there and others. So a lot of these ports, locations that didn't have theme parks then, now they do.
Yeah. And that'd be interesting, like, to go to a theme park and then, on the ship and then wait 4 years for it to come back around again, kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's one of the ideas that it sounds neat, but then you kind of look at it and you're like, all right, I guess I kind of see why that didn't happen. That's a little bit bizarre. Yeah.
There was a very interesting idea. They actually started to look at oil tankers and cruise ships because they figured out that an aircraft carrier Probably wasn't the right sort of vehicle, but in the end, none of them were the right sort of vehicle.
Yeah, I guess not.
But interesting to see how some of this probably gave Disney an introduction to the idea of dealing with entertainment on the high seas, and probably contributed to what we have today as the Disney Cruise Line.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how the idea starts, like you said, it starts and morphs and then becomes something very different. It started with a certain, very, very, very different start.
Yep. Well, I've got to say this was a really interesting list. I think it's amazing that we had six complete theme parks that were proposed and developed and got, a certain way down the road before it turned out that they didn't make it to concrete and steel. But all interesting stories, and I enjoyed hearing about them and doing the research myself.
Yeah, and in some cases, money was spent, people were hired, things were rolling, and then for some reason or another, it just, fell by the wayside.
Yep. Okay. Good list. So number 1, Westcott. Number 2, Disney's Mineral King. Number 3, Disney's America. Number 4, Disney's Riverfront Square. Number 5, Port Disney. And number 6, the Crazy SS Disney. So, Aaron, a good list, a lot of great information that I didn't know about before. So thanks for doing all that research. And if folks are interested in hearing about your take on Disney, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can head on over to my blog. It is Magic and Misadventures. So they can go over to magicandmisadventures.com. And I write about Disney, primarily Disney World, but I do branch into Disneyland and the movies and other aspects as needed. And that's everything from do-it-yourself projects to maybe ranting about an attraction or a rumor, or discussing bits of news. I've did a series not too long ago on my time as a cast member. So it's really all over the map. As often happens, as we discussed, with these parks, I come up with one idea and it morphs into something very different along the way. But they can head over to magicandmisadventures.com. From there, they can find links to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and various social media outlets. I'm all over the web. So yeah, they should check that out. I would love if they check that out.
So I know I always say this, but I really do enjoy your take on Disney, and Magic and Misadventures is one of those Disney sites that I always like checking out. So thanks for sharing that with the rest of the Disney community.
It's a lot of fun. I'm glad to do it.
And thanks for going over this list with me today of the Disney parks that never made it off the drawing board. It was a fun conversation.
This was a lot of fun. This was cool. There was a lot of fun stuff to learn.
Today we head out to the Music of the Oasis section of Disney's Animal Kingdom. And yes, we've made it through the list of the top 6 Disney parks that never made it off the drawing board, but our conversation doesn't have to be over. I'd like to hear what you think. Leave your comments on the show notes page at worldofwalt.com/89, a page that works very nicely on desktops, tablets, and smartphones. I'd like to thank everyone who's been in touch, and I'd like to invite you to follow me on social media, facebook.com/worldofwalt and pinterest.com/worldofwalt. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I would appreciate it if you would tell your family and your friends about it. To wrap up for today, as always, a big thank you for spending some of your time with me. I'd also like to thank everyone who visits the worldofwalt.com site, where you can read interesting Disney articles and chat with other folks who enjoy Disney in the forums and in the comments sections. By listening here and by visiting the site, you allow me to share the fun of Disney with you, and that is very cool. Thank you for being a part of it. So, until next time, my friend, may God bless you.
So there's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, shining at the end of every day. There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away.